never give in. Never, never, never.
She knew he was doing something a bit different, but I never told her. She thought it was an excuse for them to get out and have a good time. Of course, we let them think that.
Behind these clusters of ships or barges, there stand very large numbers of German troops awaiting the order to go on board and set out on their very dangerous and uncertain voyage across the seas.
We were trained saboteurs, and the harm we would want to do would be on the enemy, but we had no protection. We were not protected by the Geneva Convention in any way. We were just civilians operating behind the enemy lines.
They'd given us a tin of food to keep, and I complained that there wasn't enough to keep 7 men more than a fortnight. And I said, oh, that's fine. We reckon you'll all be dead in 10 days.
If this invasion is going to be tried at all, it does not seem that it can be long delayed.
If you were to root around under the beech trees of Wentwood Forest in Gwent, you could still find the secret underground hideout where the 7 members of Jonah Patrol plotted their part in a potential resistance campaign in the last war. They were part of the auxiliary units, Churchill's secret resistance network that stretched around the coastal counties of southern England, up the east coast to Scotland, and along the South Wales coast in the west. They were civilians, apparently members of the Home Guard, but in fact entirely separate from it. Civilians, but trained as saboteurs who would harass an invading army supply lines, cripple his communications, and generally hinder his advance. They were ready to go into action the moment the coded command was given. And the message that Jonah Patrol were waiting for, the balloon's gone up.
If the Germans land here, the only thing that matters is to beat them before they can do serious harm. And it lies with you, the civil population, either to help them or to make their task impossible.
The Home Secretary, Herbert Morrison, was actually addressing the nation as a whole, but making the enemy's task impossible pretty well summed up what the auxiliary unit saw as their own particular mission, and they approached it with a religious zeal. So in a way, it was quite appropriate that the names given to the 8 Monmouthshire patrols were downright biblical, names of Old Testament figures like Moses and Esau, Abraham and Jonah, all chosen people after all. Alan Hollingdale was leader of Jonah Patrol.
I had a pretty detailed knowledge of the countryside, and one of the requirements of men for this job was that they should be able to get about at night, particularly, because most of the work would be done at night. And so the knowledge of the countryside was pretty valuable. I had been, from a younger days, a member of the Scout movement, and in those days Rover Scouts were in existence. And there was a certain similarity between the setup of the proposed cell and a Rover Scout crew, if I may put it that way. You had to have friends who were reliable, who could live off the country if necessary, could sleep out without worrying, and look after themselves under various circumstances.
When they were choosing members of the patrols, they relied heavily on personal recommendation. It helped maintain secrecy and build up mutual trust, although there were other personal qualities that played a part as well, according to John Campbell and Les Vick of Moses Patrol.
A gang had been selected who was supposed to be rough people who knew the countryside and things like that. And we met this
Captain Todd when we first knew him.
Major.
He was promoted eventually, look.
Was he? Mm. He was in the intelligence corps anyway.
That's right.
Came along, he was in mufti with a tweed cap and fishing flies all around his cap.
Country gentleman.
He fed us a lot of beer, told us some stories about Dunkirk and the German atrocities, what they did in Holland, and gave us some more beer. Then about 9 o'clock he said, well, we'll break off now for 10 minutes. So half the people excused themselves to go out to the toilet, presumably. And while they were out, he said, "That's it. You must never trust these weak-blooded people. When they come back, we'll have some more beer and some more talk. And then you 4 or 5 we hear, meet me tomorrow night in the Queen's Hotel in Newport." Which we did. And the first thing he did there was to produce the Official Secrets Act forms. Sign these. So we signed those, and then he said, "I'll tell you what it's all about now."
Okay.
And so we were in it before we knew what it was, except that it was going to be dangerous. I didn't know what dangerous meant.
If the balloon had gone up, the meaning of danger would have been all too apparent. As it was, the units led a double life, carrying on the day job as normal, but letting slip no hint of the secret training that went on at night and at the weekend. That's where the cover of the Home Guard came in useful. That secret training covered the use of a fearsome array of weapons, from the Tommy gun to the cheese cutter, a handy little device made of piano wire. They were told it would come in useful for garrotting the odd isolated guard or some unsuspecting sentry. And above all, they became very intimately acquainted with high explosives. Auxiliary units had the new plastic explosive long before it was issued to the regular troops, as well as the more conventional gelignite, hand grenades and phosphorus bombs, pencil fuses and detonators. And rather incongruously, in the middle of this armoury, there was an innocent little booklet, The Countryman's Diary for 1939, as it would have appeared to any casual onlooker. But inside its bland buff covers, its contents were, almost literally, explosive. A saboteur's handbook for the beginner.
Some improvised mines. These are all things you can easily make yourselves, as the materials are easy to find. The first step is to make a burster. This can be made by filling a small cocoa tin with gelignite, 1 pound is enough, and moulding in a small knot of cord-tex on the end of a 2-foot length. Bring the spare end out through the lid. The next step is to make the shrapnel part of the mine. The shrapnel itself is usually small pieces of scrap metal, such as nuts and bolts, nails, etc. If you can't get these, use small, sharp stones. Pack these into a bigger tin around the burster. The more shrapnel, the better. But remember, you will have to carry the thing about. With a little imagination, dozens of other ideas will present themselves, and they will probably be better suited to your part of the country.
We were practicing one day with explosive, and Wally brought an old copper fire boiler with him, the one that heats the water behind the fire. He brought it with. He said, "I've got something that we can practice on tonight, boys," he said. Brought this boiler. So we stuck some explosive in and put some fuses in it, lit the fuse, and it went off with a terrific bang. As you can imagine, this thing was hollow. Anything going off in a hollow space gives a tremendous bang. And all of a sudden, we could hear and the pieces of this stuff were falling down all around us. Luckily, no one ever got injured. We could hear it going all directions. Tremendous number of pieces were flying about.
Didn't people ask questions when that sort of thing happened?
Oh yes, the following day you go to work and people would be saying, "The bomb up over so-and-so," whatever it was, a tremendous bang up there. It happened up to so-and-so. No, it wasn't up there. It was further over than that. It was further over and somewhere. No, it was in that direction. And you hear them all talking in the pubs and so forth. Going to the pub afterwards. We just sitting in the corner, just having our little half pint or whatever it was, listening to the conversation, saying no more, just joining in and saying, "Oh yes, I remember, it was a nasty old thump."
And if you find certain unusual things happening, do not be too concerned about them. You may find that your husband, your brother, your friend in the Home Guard has suddenly been called up. That may not mean anything, except that necessary precautions are being taken.
For civilians who are probably more used to lathe setting or haymaking than pencil fuses and sticky bombs, the training was pretty intensive. although many of them already possessed the most essential skill, being able to melt into the countryside as they moved about. They soon added to that the ability to bypass barbed wire and booby traps, and to reconnoitre secretly any big houses in their locality that an occupying army might commandeer as its headquarters. Glencourt, a derelict sandstone mansion in a secluded bowl-shaped valley, proved to be the perfect training ground. It was ideal for target practice, for secret infiltration, and for advanced crawling about.
Used to roam all around these fields above here and come on top of the hills and around the back to make little mock attacks, one thing and another. But we used to do a lot of our crawling round, creeping in.
Did a lot of crawling round?
Oh, that's all we used to spend our time doing, was really getting down in the undergrowth. And
There weren't so many nettles about then, either. In the front of the little booklet they gave us earlier on, there was a little bit in italics on the frontispiece. On thy belly shalt thou go.
That's right.
Which was from the Bible somewhere.
Remember you crawling at that ditch with a revolver on the door? Yes, do I? I'll never forget it. This is when Colonel Douglas was down here. And it just about corpsed me. And I was down on the ground. I could not get up. And he came along to have a word. And I should have got up on my own. I shouldn't have sat at his feet. But could I get up? Not like just couldn't. I was flat out. Never been so exhausted. Had to attack a pillbox.
That's right.
And there were a lot of hedges and bushes and so on in between, and this sunken ditch that also I had to make use of. I had to find some way to get down there within grenade throwing distance and attack the pillbox. I got down all right, rather scratched and so on, and threw the 2 grenades, which landed reasonably well. And then had to get back, and that was the job. Oh dear. But I always remember the flat out on the ground and just could not get to my feet. What's he thinking? Oh, what's the order going to be next, you know? But it made no difference.
What were your relations like generally with regular service people?
It was remarkable in this organisation. We were an undisciplined crowd, and you couldn't get away from it. Very undisciplined. But it worked. And I think the people who started the things off realised that that was the way to do it. No good spending 6 months on basic training or anything like that, foot slogging or anything.
Sergeant Rob was marching. Remember we were marching and we developed having the left hand go out with the left leg?
Yeah.
You know, instead of vice versa. And we got it off to a T, didn't we? And he looked at us. He said, I don't know what you're doing wrong. He said, whatever it is, please stop it. He couldn't make out a tale of us. He said that. He said, what crowd are you lot anyway? He said to us, what crowd are you lot? He couldn't understand us at all. He gave us map reading. We should be able to read maps and map reading and everything. And the night we went and raided Ogmore Castle, we got in there and got out again, didn't we? It was supposed to be a dump on the enemy. Supposed to got in and occupied the castle and used it as a petrol dump. And other stores, and we had to go in at night and blow it up. We knew where the petrol dumps were because we spied it on the afternoon, didn't we? And we had to go in at night now and take these sender flashes and other stuff with us, and it was all tins it was and everything there, and get in from four areas, wasn't it? And we had to crawl through there was mowing grass. They hadn't cut the grass. We had to crawl in, and they had guards on there, and one guard was saying, "There's somebody about here," he said. He was swishing with a whip or something. He said, there's somebody about here, he said. I know they are. He said, I can't find him, don't know where they is, but he said, if I catch him, they're having this. We all got in and got out, didn't we? And we got up on the hill. We had a delayed action of about half an hour on them, didn't we?
Yes.
And when we got up on the hill, we could see them all blowing up one after the other.
Yeah.
Rehearsal would have become reality if the Germans had invaded. Once they'd had the signal, the balloons gone up, Jonah Patrol would have slipped away to their hideout in the secluded beechwood that normally witnessed nothing more subversive than the annual explosion of bluebells and wood anemones. There they'd slip under the cunningly camouflaged entry hatch and climb down to their brick-built shelter, with 8 feet of solid earth on their roof and a 60-foot escape tunnel leading to a disused quarry as their back door. At night time they'd emerge to spring their sabotage surprises on the invader and then melt away again to their secret base under the beech leaves. They'd be unlikely to last more than 10 days, they were told. Well, the ingenious hatch cover is long since gone, but the underground shelter's still there, if you can find it.
Now, if you stop just a moment, you are in fact standing within 20 feet of the OB, as we call it, the operational base. I don't know whether you can spot where it is.
No sign above ground?
If you look round to your left, you'll probably be able to spot it.
It's like a shaft
Yes,
over there, under the tree.
Yes,
Let's have a look.
That's right. Yes. A lot of the small undergrowth has disappeared from here because it was very carefully shielded. And the hatch at the top was a trough, virtually, in two hinged sections. You lifted it in the centre, and both sections of the trough, which were filled with growing greenery and so on, lifted enough for you to get in to the iron ladder which led down the shaft into the chamber itself.
Can we get down there?
We can go down. I can go down through that main shaft there, or the escape shaft, which is collapsed, rotted away.
Should we try that one?
We'll try that one. I think it is easier. Now, I go down here, feet first, and slither in.
Disappearing down there like a fox down his burrow.
There it is. It's a chamber about 12 feet by 10, I suppose. And on this side were bunks for 6 chaps. Here in the centre was a table. There was a shelving there and shelving there. We had stoves of various types reputed to be able to cure the condensation problem, but they never did. There was a cooking stove, of course.
How did
One
you get rid
problem
of
was
fumes?
get rid of the fumes. Now, we found that the updraft through that drainage vent was pretty brisk. What we did in the end was to get a tree which was hollow, an old trunk, so that put over the vent, it did carry the fumes up fairly high. And although if you were cooking bacon and eggs in here, of course you might smell them outside, so we had to be very careful. And if we had to go into active operations, I think cooking would have to be kept down to a minimum. Mainly boiled water, I should think.
So you had provisions down here then?
Oh, yes, we were provisioned for 14 days officially, because that's as long as they thought we would last. One of the issues was a gallon jar of rum, glass jar with a cork which was sealed with a sealing wax seal. And it looked lovely, but we were warned we were not to use it except in dire emergency. And ultimately, when the stores had to go back, that went back as a gallon of rum. Actually, it was a gallon of cold tea. We had found a way of emptying it with a hypodermic, fairly coarse hypodermic syringe. I think a sort of thing that you use on horses. And we drew out the rum, the genuine rum, and stored that in other vessels, and pumped back in an equivalent in tea. And I often wonder if and when it was ever found out.
Who the lucky person was that got the cold tea.
Yes, it probably went into stores somewhere or other.
How about after the war? What happened after the war then?
We formed in this county an association which we called the Monmouth Auxiliaries Association, after the auxiliary units, you see. And we had our inaugural meeting at the Greyhound Lantristant. I think there were 64 names at the beginning. We're now down to 8. And 7 of those 8 met last Friday for a reunion, also at the Greyhound.
We were more on love when the Americans started shooting real bullets at us.
We had some fun on that, and that's done. First thing that started at us off, we go up there, we had to report to Bucknell's office. So we walked in, there was only 7 of us, you see, in this lot, and inside there was a big rocking horse that he got the Royal Engineers to make for this kid for Christmas. You know what they are like, big solid thing, everything absolutely solid, big thing. And he had it inside the office. And we were looking at this thing and having a smile at it. And Len Escott, when they went out into the front, under the garden, and rolled up 4 or 5 balls of soil and put it under the horse's tail. And we came back in now. One of the sergeants come in. And he said, "Who done that?" And And I don't know which one of us said, oh, the horse. Oh, he said, you're being funny, so-and-so's a wood. What he didn't, and he was really tamping, and Bucknell come in, and he saw it, and he laughed his head off over it. He said, oh, forget about these fellas. He said, they're mad.
Remember, Dan, you referred to the Porthcawl trip, one of those occasions we went out for training at
Dunraven, wasn't it?
That's
Dunraven Castle.
We went right through to Porthcawl
and
had a medical. And I always remember Basil Penn going in front of the MO. It was a rough check that our hearts were in a reasonable state and that sort of thing. And Basil was developing a beer paunch then, you see, and he stripped down. And the medical officer was calling out for his assistant to write down on the records. Came to Basil Penn, he looked at him. Pregnant.
How many people would agree that some of the worst moments that I recall was when the instruction came through that we were not to leave any colleague alive in enemy hands. I remember when that came through, some of our patrol turned white at the thought of it, and I could name one here and said, I don't think I can carry on. He said, I could never kill one of my colleagues. I said, he said to Jack Rennie, who was our patrol leader, he says, the crunch has come, and he took a lot of persuading to carry on. That was really the crunch moment when I said, no one must be left alive in enemy hands. That was a crunch moment.
Immediate action for casualties. Bullet or knife in chest. Prop up the patient and give him nothing to eat or drink. If he bleeds much from the mouth, the wound is probably fatal. A severe wound does not, as a rule, begin to hurt for about an hour, but shock is experienced almost at once. For the latter, warmth and rest are essential, but morphia should not be given until it is needed. The normal morphia dose is 1/4 grain. If the patient is expected to die, 1/2 grain may be given without affecting any recovery that he may make. If it is impossible for him to live, 1 grain is permissible.
For Alan Hollingdale, the crunch moment had come at an earlier stage. As a patrol leader, it had been his job to recruit the rest of his unsuspecting crew, and that made him, he felt, somehow responsible for any reprisals that might be taken against the friends, the family, or even the whole community of an active resistance cell.
When I realised for the first time the possibility of them getting our wives and families and getting information out of them, if they had any information, my stomach sank to start with. I was flabbergasted in a way at what I had done, what I had committed myself to. I thought, have I really any right to do it? I mean, as far as myself, all right, but there were others involved, not only my own family, but of course the families of the wives and families of the men in the patrol. It was when I was building the patrol up, and I think I got 3 or possibly 4 members together at that time. And I sat down, I remember, feeling almost sick, but trying to concentrate on what I had done and the reasons for it, by which time, of course, things were very, very serious. Hitler was only 20 miles away. That unless things like this were faced and tackled, then what hope had we? And I think each of the members of the patrol felt the same. We did have one discussion on it, I can very well remember. And it turned out that each man felt the same. So there we are. We realized the position, we accepted it, and so we went forward in it. But we could have been instrumental in doing an awful lot of harm and injury to other people, of our own families and friends.
Why would it have been worse for you than for regular service personnel?
The regular service personnel were army. They were there, their job was to defend us, defend the rest of the people. There was nothing secret about it. But we were civilians, nominally, so that when it was found out that we were spies, saboteurs, and so on, it was rather a different picture. We were trained saboteurs. The harm we would want to do would be on the enemy, but we had no protection. We were not protected by the Geneva Convention in any way. We were just civilians operating behind the enemy lines. We had no army standing that we could use.
What do you think would have happened if you had been captured?
If it was when we were in process of an excursion to do some damage, we would have been carrying an awful lot of dangerous material in the way of explosives, of grenades, of Mills bombs. We'd be like a proverbial Christmas tree, I suppose, with grenades in your breast pockets and plastic explosives strapped around your waist and so on. That the intention was that if we would fight it out to start with, but if it appeared that it was impossible and that we were being captured, we would just press the button and there'd be nothing left.
You'd blow yourselves up?
Yeah.
As it turned out, making that first difficult decision was to remain the most courageous act required of the auxiliaries. Around D-Day, they were drafted down to the Isle of Wight so that the regular forces there could be released for duties in France. This was to be the closest that most of them would come to the prospective invader. For them, the balloon was not going to go up. And with the threat of invasion receding, their commando-style super training was superfluous. Many of their families and most of the population knew nothing at all of their role as a potential resistance force, and in November 1944, the order came for the auxiliary units to stand down. All the patrols received a letter from their commanding officer. It was the only written acknowledgement that they'd ever existed.
From Colonel F.W.R. Douglas, Commander, Auxiliary Units, 30th of November, 1944. The War Office has ordered that the operational side of auxiliary units shall stand down. This is due to the greatly improved war situation and the strategic requirements of the moment. I realize what joining the auxiliary units has meant to you. So do the officers under my command. You were invited to do a job which would require more skill and coolness, more hard work and greater danger than was demanded of any other voluntary organization. In the event of action stations being ordered,
looking back
you
now,
knew
with
well
the benefit of hindsight, how effective do you think you could have been?
One wonders whether in 14 days given to us, we could really have been very effective. I think we could have done some damage. We might have made him pause to think that there perhaps is a bigger resistance organization than there actually was. It might have made him a little more careful and slowed him down a bit.
The last 4 years, so is the regular army. It was due to you that more divisions left this country to fight the Battle of France. And it was due to your reputation for skill and determination that extra risk was taken, successfully, as it turned out, in the defence arrangements of this country during that.
We never know what we could have done until we were put to the test.
And thank you for this voluntary effort.
That's the crux of the thing, isn't it?
In view of the fact that your lives depended on secrecy, no public recognition will be possible. But those in the most responsible positions at General Headquarters Home Forces know what was done, and what would have been done had you been called upon. They know it well. It will not be forgotten.
Taking part in The Balloon's Gone Up were Alan Hollingdale, Les Bully, John Campbell, Les Vick and Ken Griffiths. The reader was Dorian Thomas. The programme was produced and presented in Cardiff by Ruth Prince.